here was what was the purpose of that exercise? Was it to, you know, what was the purpose to recall? Was the purpose to recall or to actually teach it? And the answer to that is yes. So there's an amazing thing about doing a lot of ATM, that it in a way that is completely understandable. It's not woo-woo at all. These lessons get into your bones, and you will have a memory of them. Now, my kinesthetic memory, I would say, is probably slightly better than my auditory memory, but that is cheap. So that's not saying much. My visual memory is much better. However, in the early 2000s, when we were running the training program in Adelaide, and I was Jenny, so kind of busy, but we'd get on the floor a fair bit to do the ATMs. I was absolutely astonished at how much I remembered. I would lie on the floor, whoever was teaching would be teaching an ATM, and I'd go, yeah, I remember this. But if you'd asked me, you know, like I would see the, you know, the teaching schedule and think, oh, I don't know any of those. But I remembered them kinesthetically. So this, I would like you to have a bit of faith in that process for yourself too. It worked for me. It's going to work for you because I'm on a pretty low spectrum of memory. Now, just on that note, probably my first major tangent on the day. It's been quite good so far tonight. Kinesthetic memory is, people talk about muscle memory. I just want to put it out there. Memory is not in your muscles, it's still in your brain, all right? So don't go, because I talked to a rheumatologist and he said something like, oh, I believe in muscle memory. You know, the memory, the muscles remember. I'm like, nah, it's not the muscles that are remembering, mate. They don't, you know. That's where the receptors are that picks up the data that you store in your brain. But don't make any mistake about it. The memory is up here, right? But it's encoded, and we will recognise it as, you know, the sort of the internal representation of that memory can be kind of retrieved as, you know, a somewhat physical sensation, and it can be triggered. The memory of it can be triggered by, but it's just that it's encoded in kinesthetic information, not in visual information or auditory or olfactory. I think many of you would remember an ATM that smells. Maybe you do. We did that sort of lolly smell, okay? That's right. Yeah, that's right. So that's my tangent. This little bugbear. Muscle memory is not in the muscles. It's in, but it's the sensation that the muscles picked up as the receptors for the movement after the movement. Okay. Everybody happy about that? Look, I don't think anybody would be confident to say exactly where it was. I would be very confident in saying that network, and it's not just variety. So it certainly somatosensory, but where it would go from there, so that's the appreciation of it. So that would be the initial part of the memory encoding, would be variety, partly, but then it would have to go to association cortex, and then it would have to go into where would not be my best guess. I would say I don't know. No, that's my short answer, not just variety. No memory that just fits in one little tiny area. It would have to go more. It would have to go limbic. It would have to go orbitofrontal as well. So it has to tap into that. But that's irrelevant. What I think is irrelevant. Okay, so yes, in part, back to your question, it is in part getting you to how do you remember things, and not just how do you remember the verbal instruction, but understanding that your body has done this and that you can tap into that. So yes to that part of the question. And yes, it is practicing teaching. It's practicing observing. It's practicing communicating. So, teachers, what did you do well that kind of surprised you? Were you planning on doing well, so you're not surprised? So let's separate those two things out. What did you do well? That's irregardless of whether it's a surprise or not. Yeah.
I thought that half an hour sounded like a really long time, given that I'd only written 4 lines. But when you were giving us time, picking up the time wind up, I was like, no, I need more time, and I had everyone experience working in fast forward.
Right. Yes. Yes. So don't be fooled, because it's interesting. When I was going through the lesson last night, I'd started and sat reading through it again Saturday and finished last night. I'm thinking, oh, this is good. It's starting off. It's a really simple lesson. There's pretty much only a couple of moves. And I think, did you all experience it? Yes, there is only a couple of moves, but his attention to detail about what to pay attention to is very complicated. In a way, there's a pattern to it, but it's not. It's simple, but it's not simplistic. Is to quote Zoran from yesterday. Quite like that yesterday, Zoran. I do listen to you guys. Huh? We had a meeting yesterday. Really? Yeah, that's right. He was saying, yeah. No, well, we were talking about that being a bit of a theme. So I'm just tying into stuff. I said we had a really productive meeting yesterday, didn't we? Yeah. Okay. Okay. So, where was I? Yeah. So it's simple, but it's there's a lot to pay attention to. What else? What other teachers? What else did you feel quite good about? Like practice feeling good about something, for goodness sake. The only opportunity to. Okay, tell us how that was. You felt good about the observation, what that you could observe. You're going to hold it, put it up there. Yeah.
I think just observing what the people on the floor are doing, and noticing, and then if someone can help you on the next thing that you could say to them, like say, you notice, yeah, just picking up on prompts for people, noticing what your head's doing. All three were doing something different. So just
damn them.
Well, it was a good prompt though. Like, is your head tilting? Is it doing nothing? Or is it rolling?
Yeah.
They were all doing that.
Yep.
They're just learning that. Yeah, you don't have to have the script there all the time. Like the script's
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. Yes. 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 And that is a lovely way of talking about how this lesson is that they are interactive. You do feed off what you're seeing up to a point. And you can't go too off piece, but then you're just a ballpark. Let's mix up two metaphors then. You have a ballpark on a piece? No, probably not. Anyway, you know what I mean. You're on a different run. However, yes, you do. You are responsive to what they're doing, and that actually feels quite nice for the students. Can do, because they feel seen. And if you say something that they recognise that they're doing, they will feel seen in what can otherwise feel like a very instructional kind of thing, because we're not putting our hands on people particularly. And of course, you say it in a way that's not judgmental, so that everyone knows these are all possibilities. It's about exploring. Yeah. Okay, what else did the teacher experience that was surprisingly positive?
I was surprised how easily, really, the lesson just sort of flowed out, even though I didn't have my glasses on, so I couldn't read my notes. But it just, as it went, it just came back to me quite easily.
Yes.
So that was nice.
Yeah. So that's the experience of this, trusting your experience, your experiential memory.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's magic. It's not magic. It's there. But we can really interfere with that memory by panicking about performance and stuff like that. Panicking, getting performance anxiety. You think, I don't really know this lesson. Well, you do. You just do it. You do know it, so you might not know that you know it. And most of you probably done it several times, so it's somewhat ubiquitous. Any teacher from this group?
No, I found
Not near me. Yeah.
I found myself feeling what they must be feeling.
Jenny says you're near a speaker. What's the speaker? Up at the.
Because we've just done the lesson.
Yeah.
And I was using what I was feeling and what I was feeling to try and get them to not give us so many.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of your questions will always be, how many times do I ask someone to repeat it? Well, in the ATM book it says 25 times. Now, none of us say that anymore because it is too prescriptive. Therefore, what's the ballpark? Well, at least a couple of times is good. However, you can also start to see that there is no answer to that question because it's going to be very different. Someone who's got a really sore shoulder, 1 or 2 times is enough, or 0 is enough. I like to do it in their imagination. Somebody else might like to do 25 little tiny ones or whatever it is. So there is, you won't get any of us giving you an answer to that question. And it is about this, well, what looks like about enough? And so let's say, hands up in the room, for that first time of lifting just the right arm, let's say from the lung on your tummy, how many times would you have done it? 6, 5, 4, 5, 7 or 8. You want to go for 10? Going cheap. You get cheaper for the dozen. Not 25. No. So there is something about the repetition that is important and balanced by not overdoing. So that's where your internal experience comes in. You roughly know the ballpark. There's a ballpark. And the thing is, this is a shared responsibility. So how many times do you do it? Well, this is the person building up their internal sense of when is enough enough. Their sense of when is enough enough. But what do I need to do for myself to learn? So you don't, as a teacher, you don't necessarily have to. Alison and Emma.
Just on that issue of the number,
Yep.
and repetition. Interesting word, repetition, because I think if I did it 8 times, I didn't do it 8 same time.
Yep.
So, and I do know in that book where he says, and you hear him on tape, do it many, many times.
Yeah.
And I don't know what other people's experience is, but increasingly, at first I probably did do it 25 the same way.
Yeah.
That.
Yeah.
Especially if you're trying to get through 25 in what you probably know is a short period of time.
Yeah.
But increasingly now I don't do that so much. I might do it one way and then
Yeah.
So I don't know what other people's experience is like, but I wondered from the teacher's point of view what that looks like. Like if you're watching people doing that and insensitively moving,
Yeah.
if you see something
Yeah.
like that,
Yeah.
put like a plant,
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I guess that'll be one person's way of doing it, and you will get some information from that, but it'll really be slightly different information.
Yeah. So this is another really salient question about this. So there's repetition, and then there's the degree of variation within the repetition. And you're absolutely right. Your seasoned students start getting somewhat more varied and exploratory in their repetitions. So it's repetition with variation. And then as a teacher, you have a sort of, again, a ballpark of within what parameters are you going, will you kind of allow people to practice with variation? So this is again where you might have to take some responsibility. So often what happens in a certain period in the training program, let's say is that students do start doing varied practice, and you'll see them on the floor, and they'll do a couple on this side and a couple on this side, and I'll have to stop them because that is going off the, like this lesson is a one-sided lesson, really setting up a one-sided thing. So you would have actually heard me say that a couple of times, stay with the one side. Unless you've got a pain, but stay with the one side. And so that's when so you've set the parameters in which somebody can do variable practice. It's called variable practice. And actually, from a motor learning point of view, it's really important. The variation, it's actually a hallmark, again, of a really good ATM lesson, because it's the variations that have an awareness about them that turn this into a learning. Because then you get the more or less, that's more betterer or less betterer kind of thing. And that internal exploration is really juicy in a student. Now we kind of impose the variations. If someone's not doing it, like try it with your head this way or this way or this way, try it on the, not try, experiment or whatever the word is, on inhalation or exhalation. But actually some students start doing that all spontaneously, and they start, and you can see them, they'll start doing a little movement, and you can see the thinking, and they'll start going a bit bigger, and they'll start going a bit lower, and you start seeing all this kind of mucking about. And you as a teacher, you kind of, it's like watching your children, you watch them experimenting up to a point, and then you have to go out. So that's where, and again, you've been talking about this last week, this expectation. As a teacher, you do have the range of explorations that you are interested, this lesson is interested in, and that's the play space. Just like the number of repetitions has a space, the variations have a space. Yeah. So it's really interesting to watch people. And sometimes what we'll do, particularly in a training program, is we'll see 3 really wildly different variations of the way someone heard the instruction. And sometimes we'll do that. We'll get you to stand up and come and have a look at those 3 people. You have to know each other and love each other and not judge each other for us to do that, because, a group that doesn't have that safety will think that we're saying that these people are all right or all wrong or something. But again, the third point about starting to do this exercise is that you're now watching 2 people. So we're adding 2 more realities to your own internal reality, and seeing what their variations are, which will be different to yours, which will be hopefully interesting. That's the third possibility. You're thinking asking why we're doing this exercise. That's number 3. Emma.
I was just going to ask you about 25 again.
Yeah.
Because, like, in the room, most people were around 5.
Yep.
Which is very different to 25.
Yeah.
What would have been the benefit of doing 25? Because I think that would generally encourage them, like, mindset, not doing many variations. As Alison said, it's almost like if you're doing 25, it's like in those exercises where there's just continual repetition.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, what do you think people would benefit of saying 25? Because there must have been some rationale.
There is a rationale. And now this lesson is really interesting, because in this lesson, I'll give you the punchline in a way, or one of the punchlines. What he's really interested in here is he's messing around with your tonus and the level of activation in your flexors and in your extensors. And you do need a certain number of repetitions, as it were, to effect a change in their resting tone. So there is an element of you need to do enough in order to feel a change in the resting tone of the muscle. And so in effect, in a way, this lesson does require some repetition. have that neurological event. Now, for some people, of course, that neurological event will happen in 1 or 2 because they're never thinking about, oh, bugger, yeah, I forgot about this. Switch them on. And that's all it takes. Whereas for me, because I can get into quite bad habits, I could, spend many repetitions with variation, getting my flexors more activated and organised, and very little on my extensions. And that's me, So that's where the sort of the repetitions are important. Yeah. However, I don't. I said earlier, I don't teach ATM classes regularly at home anymore, but I routinely require my clients to do ATM as homework. And sometimes I'll give them a tape lesson. Sometimes I'll give them a little snippet of something that I write out where they do. And invariably, if they come from whatever tradition they come from, they say, how many times do you want me to do this? Now, there's so many things non-Feldenkrais about that statement, I can almost not begin to tell you. For a start, how many do you want me to do for you? For me, you're doing it for me, honey, you're doing it. This is entirely for you. It makes no difference to me whether you do it or not. Get that little thing out of the way. So that means that then poor things, they never know what they're going to get. This is me going into this great big spiel about, the number is kind of, is modified by the quality. So if your quality factor is really high, you don't need as much in the number. But if your quality is really low, maybe you need more in the number, maybe not, maybe you get bored. So the more interesting question is, how far up in quality stakes do you want me to dial up? How much awareness do you, if they ask me the question, how much awareness do you want me to bring to this? That would be a far more interesting question for their homework. Do you want me to have 10 out of 10 awareness for the movement or 1 out of 10? You see what I mean? Because that's actually the parameter that we were interested in the repetition. Yes. 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 Exactly. Yes. So these are really excellent questions that I want you to play around with. So if you routinely only do 1 or 2, because then you stop because you get bored by doing more. If you routinely do 15, you're too shy to say it, but you do heat, cut it back and see if you can still get the same information. Like play around with this number of repetitions about that, and it will be different for everybody, but it's a really interesting question, and it will be different for each lesson as well. The other aspect, of course, of repetitions is, and this is a Feldy principle as such, is that we slow it down. Right, so if people are doing 25 repetitions just like this, they're like an oscillating fan, then absolutely they can't be aware of it because their awareness is too slow to do that. So that will always confound some of the repetitions if they do it fast. Yeah. 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 So there's an interesting trick that happens with finding that, like, so let's say there's the 3 options, having the head towards the arm, in the middle, or away from the arm. Now, in the book, he says it's for most people, it's easy having the head turned away. Now, that's not true for me. Far easier, I feel I am better organised lifting up my arm when my head goes that way. That's just the way but I'm prepared to admit that that's the way I'm organised. I'm not saying that that's what you all found. However, what is important about, there's 2 things that are important about finding the ease. But the first is that it's simply a process practice. How do I answer that? How do I go about answering that question? You see what I mean? So that so in answering that question, I actually have to know what easy and hard is, and I have to pay attention to myself, and I have to honour my sensation, but my sensation, not what he said in the book, and that's really important. So simply answering the question is important. What you then do with it. Now the nervous system will do something very interesting with it. If we really, really are serious about basing our learning on what is easy, then by experiencing what is easy and kind of highlighting it, I have great faith in our nervous system. It will start recognizing what is it about that position, that configuration that is easy, and it will start using some of that sort of information to make the other two possibilities also easy. Have you all experienced that? Where you've found something, this way is really easy, this way is quite hard, and then you just keep doing it, then all of a sudden the hard way becomes easy, and you go, what the hell? That's bloody marvellous. That is the nervous system being healthy and being respected and given the space to learn from itself. Yeah. Oh, yeah, here comes the microphone.
With the hindsight of a trainer, you say confidently, well, this is the way I find it easy, as if I don't have to explore anymore.
Oh. When do I say that?
Yes.
Almost
well, I mean,
never. Well, no, I say it with the confidence of, for me, at this point in time, this one, actually, for me, it feels easy with my head turned towards my phone. And I'll leave it at that. But I own it as my thing, not as anybody else's thing. I wouldn't know this. Now, if we were doing a certain lesson, and I'm thinking of a certain lesson, where you're doing sort of like reptilian stuff, and you want the head, the hand, the face and the hand to be associated, even if that wasn't my easiest way, I would ask you all to then do it, because I want you to experience that configuration, even if it's not your easy way. So I know I'm giving, this is the frustrating thing about any question you ask, answer is so long-winded, but that's the. So there are times when you will allow you to then free range with the easy way. There are other times we'll go, okay, for you that's the easiest way. Just notice that's really interesting, and we'll hope that your nervous system takes some of the ingredients out of that and helps use those ingredients to refine the less easy ways. And other times you'll just actually go with the sequence and the trajectory that we want that lesson.
So when you're doing an ATM on your own and you've got all the time, or you've got more time, you're not within an instructor's time, you may explore what you find easy about one position and try to apply it to other positions, especially if it's if you've been told or whatever that most people find it easier to do the other way, and you're wondering about that. Or you can just sit with what you find easiest and just, not bother about developing it further.
And the really key thing that you said then, which tells me that you're engaged in the process, is that you can, when you're on your own and you've got time to explore, I can explore what is easiest, and then start wondering about the other things. The word wondering is the really key thing there, is that you start wondering, how come it feels easier this way and not this way for me? So then you start doing the variation stuff, like, well, is it because when my head is turned this way, that makes my ribs easier to go backwards? But when my head's that way, my ribs aren't easy to go backwards. Or is that somehow when my head's turned this way, my shoulder girdle is free, but when I turn my head this way, yes, my shoulder girdle is not moving anymore. And you start feeling these different things and characterizing some of the reasons, or not even reasons, some of the factors that are present in the easier way that aren't present in the harder way, and vice versa. It might not be a cognitive thing, but that's some experiential thing, and that's the interesting. But I wonder why do I have this difference? That is really, that word wonder is a beautiful word. one of my friends, I can never work out whether she's saying wonder or wander, because she says them the same way. The same thing, if you're wandering, you might be wondering. So you can have a wonder or a wander through that process, because that's what it is. Now, the other thing that you said that was really lovely was that it's not like the easier way and the harder way is good and bad. It's just how it is. One requires more effort and one requires less effort. And again, one of the biggest gifts that we have in this method is that the situation where it's harder is actually, in a way, more interesting. That's where we've got more potential to learn. And it is truly a marvelous thing when you can find something that you can't do and go, I can't do that. Can you imagine saying that in our culture? Fantastic, I can't do that. Crap, that is marvelous. That is not something that we often say, but that's something that you can aim for in Feldenkrais. You can aim to get there, because I reckon that is close to that is close to, bring it on. That was so hard. And go, yum, yummy, yum, yummy. See, like looking at your face, did you know what I mean? Yeah. So it's a stretch. This is a stretch target. It's a stretch target. Don't worry, I didn't go. I just had a little.
Yeah, interesting is a far better thing to contemplate than a creeping feeling of abnormality.
Yes, yes, yes. Be interested, not judgmental is the thing. Now, of course, I can say that, and I was just saying to Jenny and Zoran, I went to the ATM machine, I put in my card and it swallowed it. Now, I didn't go, yummy, yum, yummy, this is the place to get really interested and I can practice being a nice person. No, I stalked into that branch and I gave the girl quite a hug. So, we are the stretch target here with the negative hard. That was hard. And then go, oh, fantastic, what a learning opportunity. You know what really confounded the poor girl? But I asked, why did this happen? And she went, like, she just really didn't understand me. What do you mean? What do you mean, why did it happen? Why did this happen? Like, what's wrong with the machine? Yeah, so I agree. All right, so anything, so the observers, anything that you noticed that was really interesting? And then we'll... When do we get the box? Next week, when I'm not here.
Yeah. It was really interesting because I've noticed my observation was a lot more refined this time around than when I've done it in the past. And watching two is always more interesting than watching one, which is different to watching a whole group. But the thing that really interested me this time is I could tell when they were starting to get tired and uncomfortable.
Okay, what did you see? What did you see? Because remember I asked you to think about this during the lesson.
There's a tension that increases in the body, particularly like working with the arms in the neck.
Okay, you saw tension.
More tension. And more, it's like they were using more force to do the actual action. Yeah, and it's a feeling as well. Yeah. So that was one thing. And the other thing is that this time I actually found I was experiencing the ATM myself.
As you're watching?
As I was watching, yeah.
Okay, good. All right, any other observers see something that intrigued you?
It was difficult, nearly impossible to leave the pen from the floor. And I did it slowly and the same with the I simply couldn't do it.
Yeah. One side, the other side you could, and one side you couldn't?
I mean, when I did it slowly and finally I could, but it's very difficult.
Yeah.
when I did it slowly.
Yeah. So, and I think I said in the lesson, you know, from a biomechanical point of view, it's the first couple of millimeters of the hardest. I did say that. Therefore, if you go really fast, you miss that. You miss that point where you get the most, where you have to be the best organised. Because once you get, you know, when you're on the tummy, you're back here, you know, there's much less rotary force and gravity. So the resistance you're working at is much less. So when you're just off the floor, that's where it's really interesting. And that, but if you sweep through that, you lose it. But also, if you give up there, you lose it as well. So it's about not being frightened about it's about playing with it. Into the field, yeah. Did it get easier? Yes, easier. Did it get easier?
Weekend is here, but still, it doesn't matter even
Yeah.
when I did it 10 times.
Yeah.
When I very, very slowly,
Yeah.
I just felt it at the moment when it was so difficult.
Yeah, it's a hard lesson. You know, if you do it small and slow, it's a really hard lesson.
And that was the thing that I really noticed. I could not do it slow and small. It's one of the hardest physical movements for me to do.
Yeah.
The only way I could do it.
Yeah.
As try as I might to do it slowly, and I couldn't do it small either. And I thought that's the reality of when you can't do something.
You
actually,
go fast and you go big. Yeah.
because it's the only way you can kind of make it happen
Yeah.
until you get a bit more refinement.
Yeah.
But it also struck me that because it was so difficult, I started pondering what organisation did I need, and then watching the others do it, they did it so differently to do them.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, that didn't help.
Why not? Why not?
Well, no, in the sense of I was looking for the right way, of course.
Okay. Okay.
You know, just that training we had.
Yep.
Not from here, but
Yeah.
in life.
But there is a right way.
Yeah.
Okay, so any other observers? Julia and Emma? Yeah. You and you. No, I've got, no. Sorry. I've got a brain freeze, but Philippa. See, J and P, they're the same letter in my head. Sorry, Philippa. I know you're Philippa.
Sorry. I think what has been the observer was hearing how the instructions for the scan, or I actually had a sense that not that Kat was necessarily naming, as Kat described it, you had a sense that this is how she experienced the lesson. So that the detailing where the described where to feel the pressure, had a sense that all the parts of the body or the skeleton that she actually named was the way in which she had tracked the movement of the instructions of herself.
Yeah.
Because I thought if I was giving the same instructions, they would have been completely different because of the way I had attended to them.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is and again, this is a really important point. Again, why are we doing this? And why you're watching two people, so that you will broaden your experience of the possibilities for what people will be sensing. Because another time I'll get you to walk around half the room to look at the lying position of the other half, and you'll see how many different ways you will lie. Now, this one is a classic with your arms back like this. Now, funnily enough, have been extremely flexible, not as much as I used to be, but I have never been able to lie with my arms flat, ever. Even when I was really hypermobile as a young one, so therefore I still can't. So for me, my contact points are extremely limited. But some of you just go, and your arms are back there. Now I choose not to. I'm not fussed by that. I remember in my training program, someone saying, "Oh, well, you need a lesson because your arms don't lie flat on the floor." And I went, basically, got it off because I couldn't care less. Like she wanted to fix me because my poor thing, my arms wouldn't lie flat on the floor. And that really irritated me. I did, but that's what I wanted to do, right? So that what my point is that we can't assume that that is wrong, that my arms don't lie flat on the floor. It's just how it is. And so therefore, if I taught that lesson, I'm getting there. Wait, give me. If I taught that lesson according to what I feel, that that I have very limited contact with my arms, then you will all feel slightly weird because most of you had your arms quite flat. So therefore, for all of us, you look at you have in yourself, and this is where you are constantly juggling back and forth between what you're seeing in the student and what you have felt yourself, and you find that some kind of range within that. So, notice if your knuckles are touching, or is it the fingers, or is the back of the wrist. Now he actually talks a lot about the back of the wrist touching. Well, for me that's not together. So I didn't even mention back of the wrist, but maybe you would. So you have to do my point. I'm trying to validate in a very long-winded way what you're saying is if you go through an inventory of what you personally felt, or you're kind of narrowing the possibility. So you have to broaden it to what the possibilities.
No, that wasn't what I meant.
Oh, isn't it? Sorry.
No.
Okay.
What I meant was that the way in which Kat had understood the lesson was really beneficial in the way she described it, because she was able to talk about different qualities of how she'd experienced the scan, and in terms of giving it direction and all of those things.
Yep.
And that what I would have given as instructions would have been different, but the quality of her instruction was as such because it was related to how she had understood the lesson. That's what I meant. Not, right. It wasn't, yeah.
Okay.
It wasn't a case of limitation, it was a case of, because her experience enriched the experience of the scan.
Right. And her experience and her knowledge.
Yeah.
Because if she just stayed with her own internal experience, that was the question that I answered erroneously. Yeah. And what she actually brought to it was an understanding, a knowledge of the lesson that enriched it.
Yeah.
And you need both. People following the communication. Language is a virus. We work with language. Huh? Yeah.
I don't know if this is kind of like a bit of a stupid question, but it's kind of in my head. So when we were talking about like picking up the arm from the floor and it being a very small movement initially, and then possibly it gets larger.
It might.
Yeah. So we were talking about organization of the body. So when you first pick up that arm and it's literally, well, I think you said it or maybe Pat said it, like you could put a rice paper, like
probably said
slide
something.
it under, or was that you?
That was me.
Cigarette
Cigarette
so like
paper.
it's
sweet old-fashioned me.
And it's not very much.
Yeah.
So is that more dependent on small muscles, or is that really still based on organizing principles of the body? Could you maybe comment on that?
Yeah. Okay. So that's a really good segue into what I want to do next, which is to briefly go through the lesson about what's the lesson about. So you look very nice and comfy. May I interrupt that comfiness? Maybe both of you two just lie on your tummy, please. You can always say no. There's no but at the end of that. So if you have your arms out wherever, sort of as comfortable in that X kind of position as need be. Look, we're going to be doing this, and I guarantee I'll pick on everybody uniformly. So if you're shy, or you've got hang-ups, I don't care. No, I do care. So if the reason, one of the times I said cigarette paper is because there's a few people who are lifting their legs up and under really high, and therefore they wouldn't feel the organisation. So what is this lesson about? It's called the fundamental properties of movement. That's what he called it. There's a whole bunch of things in the lesson that you can read about what he thinks it's about. One of the things for me is you are systematically working the flexors in the front of the body, lifting against gravity, and then you're systematically working the extensors, lifting the limbs when you're lying on it. So that's the basic thing, yeah? So you keep flipping between the two, like that. Now, one of the fundamental properties, well, there's actually a couple of fundamental properties it's talking about, is that, so remember, if we ask you two to just lift your right arm, both a little bit, to work paper. Now he's quite explicit. The first time he says just lift it from the shoulder. So if I did that, and if I just demonstrate with you, what that would look like is that you would just, this would stay still, and you would just lift from there. So you two do that. Just do it in the shoulder joint. That's almost impossible. So when you first lift, that might be the first thing that goes, and that's what you're really getting. However, you don't have to do it if your self-image is just that this is only in the shoulder joint. Now you could also now think about the shoulder girdle, and I can touch the lift. You do it. Think about your shoulder girdle. So the movement by necessity can get a bit bigger. It doesn't have to. But what their experience should be is that because the work is happening more proximally, it will feel easier. The arm will feel lighter. So the more the work goes proximally, the limb will start feeling lighter. So that's actually the point of the lesson, one of the points of the lesson. So no, I didn't add anything like that because it gets back to Alison's point about allowing you to find it yourself, the variations. So, and I don't want you to side bend and I don't want you to roll, but I didn't. You actually can't if you keeping in the action. That's something of a constraint in itself. Okay, now go ahead and think again from here. So there is a weight shift. Yeah. So now if I think about from here. So Kevin, what I was doing was imagine you touch with that. So they get that sense of that holding. Then theoretically, that's, you know, if we're thinking about what are we expecting to happen in the lesson, for most people, that's what starts to happen. So their self-image is that we move our arms from here, the shoulder joint, and by doing the repetition, then they're going to get a bit tired and they will have to start thinking about variations, not necessarily cognitively thinking, oh, feeling me up shoulder girdle, but they will start thinking about further down and getting more of the bigger proximal muscles in and not the little tiny. Yeah.
And I think it stuck in my head was, I think I recall you said something this morning about smaller muscles and larger muscles working, and
small muscles do the small work, big muscles do the big work.
Yeah,
it doesn't mean the size of the movement. Sorry, that's my mistake. Small muscles do the little tiny fluffy things like this, but finger muscles should do little tiny things like that. But big powerful things, like as in more power generated has to come from the proximal. These are not. But what we do is we try and get our power from these little tiny muscles, and they're not powerful. They shouldn't be. It's one of my issues with, people thinking they've got to have really strong muscles, powerful muscles like along the chain of their spine. They're tiny muscles. They're little tiny joint stabilizers. They're not big, powerful muscles. Yeah, dexterous movement. Yeah, is that if you meant what I mean by control? Detail. Yeah. Dexterous, skilled, fine motor, all those sorts of things. So the big muscles do the big postural changes.
I guess my question was more along the lines of, did he want people to start thinking about those smaller muscles if they weren't already, as much as he wanted them to think about the whole body organization?
He wanted the small muscles to disappear. So, and one of the ways he did that, if you put your arm out again, was, so some people will actually, you'll see them, they'll lift their arm up by actually popping their wrist, and they'll do that. the first thing that lifts is actually they'll activate the wrist extensors. Now there's no way they can lift the arm, so it's completely wasted time. But people would do that. I didn't. So that if they lift your arm up, do you imagine doing that? So I mean, it can't lift the arm up, but they'll do it anyway. And this is parasitic effort. So he obviously didn't want that to happen because it's useless. It doesn't. Yeah. But you'll see people do it. They'll lift the thing because their self-image, their arm is actually mostly here because actually this part has the biggest part of the cortex. So lift your arm up, I'll lift my hand up, and then my arm will follow. So actually, he then put in the let your hand dangle so that the elbow lifts the hand up. So he consciously, explicitly got you to switch those little muscles off. Remember that? Yeah. Fine motor, tiny little dexterous, like writing, fiddly, tiny little, little, yeah. Very refined, highly coordinated movement. And it's not to say that these postural muscles aren't coordinated. They're very coordinated, but they are the grunts. There's more grunties. They're nice, we like them, but they're more grunty. Okay, so we do that. So we're thinking about activating the extensors. And then, of course, lifting the leg. So you two lift your leg, right leg, please. Now, there are several ways of doing it. Now, if her pelvis pushes into the floor, she's mostly using her hip muscles to do that, right? Look at Kevin. His right pelvis lifts away from the floor, so he's using a lot more of his back muscles, which is right and which is wrong. It's just different organisation. What we're interested in is people experiencing both of those. Now, where the lesson then goes is to do the diagonal, which we'll sort of do, we haven't done. Now lift both arm and leg up together. Same side. So see now Sue is she's using more proximal, more trunk muscles than the hip muscles to lift her leg. And that's the opposite again, so she's pushing in, which is totally fine. She's getting a nice sleep, but that's what it's been doing, isn't it? So he's had to modify a bit. Ah, yes. Thank you. Yes. Yeah. That makes a difference. Yeah. So that adds into the overall extensive thing. Now, line you back to something different. So there is so much in this lesson that we could talk about. The breath is really, read the lesson. We'll get you to do these things and online stuff. But he particularly very explicitly gets people to explore the difference between doing an inhalation and the exhalation, held breath here. He actually goes much more into you should do it on the exhalation because when you're lifting your leg and your arm on your back, because then you'll be able to engage your chest. That's a mechanical and neurological possibility. That's probable but it's not everybody's experience. So he does sometimes rove into the absolute, doesn't he? But that's okay. He's only defined it. So have your arms up, and let's just have a look at these two. Is it okay for you to have your arms up? Yeah. So wherever's comfortable. So I get out of the way. So I noticed that Sue was more JC than Ray, and that's fine. When she was doing the lesson, that's fine. Sorry. How many? I can offend every religion. Give me 5 days, 5 religions. Okay, so just lift up your right arm, both of them. Now lift it up on the inhalation. And lift it up to the exhalation. So what he says in the book is what's more likely to happen is if you lift your leg and your arm up on the exhalation, your lumbar spine is more likely to go down because your flexors are more likely to be able to engage. Whereas if you do it on the inhalation, so, and we haven't looked at this, just lift just your leg up. Does your small of your back go down or up when you lift the leg like that? So that's using hip muscles, the muscles in the front of the hip that will make the lower back raise. If you engage more the flexors of the trunk, your small of your back will go back. Which is right, which is wrong, they're just different. So what he was saying was, if you breathe out, you're more likely to use the whole flexor and your back will go down. Is this making any sense? Yeah. Yeah. So it's about, just feeling, okay, now you're differentiated. You know what the hip flexors kind of feel like, because that will make your back arch as your leg comes up. If you're engaging more of the whole flexors and kind of folding the whole front of you, then your small of your back will go backwards. Depends on what you're doing it for. It truly does. It truly does. It's true. It's the truth. It really does. So if you want to fold up, then and lift your arm and your leg together, then exciting the whole chain of flexors in the front is more efficient. But if you want to, if you want power in a way, the hip flexors are super powerful. So it's very powerful. You want to kick somebody, kick them with your hip flexors. Because they're fast. The flexor groups, along the trunk, they're predominantly postural and they're not that fast. So it's fast. It's more. Huh? Yeah. Yeah.
Hello. About flexors. Is it specifically about that group of flexors, or is it really? Yeah, when you say there's also the hip
whole
flexors?
chain. The whole chain.
So the hip flexors not necessarily.
The hip, because there is one of the muscles we're calling psoas, which we're exploring a lot in the Carter series. They flex the hip and extend the lumbar spine, so that they're not only flexion. So they arch the back and flex the hip. So when we talk about flexors, we're talking more functionally, and we are talking a lot, about the sort of the whole chain of muscles that we can use to fold. So in a way, it's an imprecision of language that I can indulge in myself in to say that flex, because there are these muscles that have a different, they have a function. Unique. Hamstrings. Scrub that on the name for the record. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so now another thing that was of relevance in this lesson is there was a fairly small line, but it's really important, is that you're engaging the flexors in this functional pattern of lifting, and then you're dropping back. And I actually told you why that's important. And that's another fundamental property of movement, is once you've worked a muscle, it has a relaxation period afterwards. And we are capitalizing on that phenomenon, that physiological wiring. So we're working the kind of so-called, let's just breathe about flexors. We're working them, and then we're taking advantage of them not working. And we're working them, and we're taking advantage of them not working. So they're shortening, and then they're lengthening. And by shortening them, they're able to lengthen them. Does that make sense? That's the way we're wired up physiologically. So if you just kept on doing it and didn't relax in between, you don't get necessarily that benefit of feeling the length. Now you're also getting the sensorial feeling, so this is work and this isn't work. And as I said, half of my clients, that's what I spend 80% of my time teaching. This is work, this is not work, because they don't know the difference. Their nervous system is just so upregulated. They just were. And I wonder why they're buggered. You know, there's one woman, she's got all sorts of whatever. And she wondered, her gut's racing, everything's racing, nothing ever switches off. Like her muscles are in a permanent state of, she's not, but she is just wired. Right? So for her to feel her arm being heavy on the floor would be, that's such a bizarre thing for her to feel. She didn't. So that's an important part of the lesson. It's a fundamental property of movement. Yes? Now the other thing, because he's flexing on the back, extending. So this is the diet that makes fat people thin and thin people fat. Because if you are, like me, I'm extremely well organised to extend, this quietens my extension and it G's up my flexors, which are very happy to be asleep. But for somebody else who is very, the other way around, their extensors are very long and quiet, this will G them up and it will lengthen their flexors. See what I mean? So it's a really good way of, there's something in this for everybody. Because if you're overworking one group, working and letting go will get them to lengthen. So what you're doing is equalizing the tonus and the flexors and the extensors by treating them equitably. Working them, not working them, working them, not working them. So that then you end up with, that sense of being longer maybe at the end. Who had the sense of being longer at the end of the lesson? To highlight the difference. Yeah. The change in tonus. Yeah, that conscious manipulation of tonus. Yes. Yes, maybe. So, there's various ways of thinking about the tone, and we'll talk about muscle tone probably when we do another series. But we have, like, you two are not asleep, and there's resting tonus there. When you have that feeling of you fall asleep and you fall asleep and you jump, because you've lost even the resting tonus and you've really gone deep sleep and the tonus kind of disappears and you actually feel like you're falling, right? So we have this kind of resting tonus, even now sitting here, and I've got sort of background postural tone in my body, but I've still got some liveliness in my muscles because I'm awake and conscious. Yeah.
Is this kind of like what you're referring to in the first year of like, how a dog is can like rest anywhere and always be ready for movement?
Yeah,
like,
probably.
It's that ideal resting tone.
Yeah, dogs are really good
sort
at
of like,
this.
Yeah, like could go to sleep or could move, but it's just in that.
Yeah, they would. Yeah, and it's
idle.
yeah.
I just I hadn't heard of resting tonus
Okay,
before.
so we have it, and you realise that if you work with somebody who's got no tonus, like they've got a flaccid flail limb from a head injury or spinal cord injury or something, it is so heavy. And if you ever picked up a sleeping baby, they are so heavy because there's just no tonus out. They're just floppy and they're a dead weight. And then, when they're awake, they get this resting tone. Now, what we're interested in is this kind of background tonus, you could say. And is it more likely? This is extremely simplistic, given what I said about, the hip flexors actually feeling fine, one version. But do we carry more tone? Which muscle groups maybe have more of that resting tonus, and the other ones less? So which ones may be a little bit more excited, and the other ones a little bit more disinterested? And in this lesson, they all get a little bit interested and a little bit.
I have a question, just from an observation on the weekend, doing another flexion lesson to a couple of people who've never done anything before of the film class package.
Yep.
And I was noticing, like, in relation to this, like, resting tonus and doing the moves and everything, I found, like, how you're saying the first part of the movement's the part where we like you know, you want to de-emphasize them because it's kind of the most difficult and stuff. But I found like it was like really hard. Like he was going, like exerting himself like a lot, and then not getting obviously that like, or not habitually giving himself the resting onus intermission in the repetitions.
Yeah.
And it's like in that case, would you tell them to like fully rest? I don't even know that, because it's that, maybe it's that first bit of the movement that's
Yeah.
the most
Yeah.
difficult
Yeah.
to like push
Yeah.
through kind
Yeah.
of thing.
I would just give them, you know, it's almost like a verbal constraint, that only lift, you know, the cigarette paper, because that's, you know, that they don't do the big crunch. Yeah, yeah. And some, you know, there are occasionally moods where you want them to go more, not always, but that initiation, that's where the juicy stuff happens, and that, because that's where you fire off the habit, you know, the default thing, and that's what you want to catch. You want to catch out that default thing. Okay, now there's the other thing to say about why this lesson is so hard is because the legs and the arms are long. So it's a very long lever. And the muscles that are moving them are very proximal, and so there's a lot of weight and a lot of length. So biomechanically, and as I said, you know, the way we are oriented on the floor, the first couple of millimeters are the hardest. So you therefore feel a lot of effort. So a change in effort is really profound, right? So if your limbs feel a little bit lighter, so did anybody have a sense of the limb getting lighter? Yep.
Hello. Hello.
Hello. Hello.
Hello.
Hello.
Yes, I want to share my experience about to feel this weight, and one of the variations I did in my mind. I don't remember if it asked to do or if I was a little sleepy, and it was very hard to sleep. And I used this idea of leng and then lead.
Yeah.
Because this, as you said, the leng is very heavy, and lenging, and then it was easy to lead.
Yeah.
And this idea of lenging and lifting and the direction.
Yeah. So you have subliminally read the book.
I read the book years ago.
Yeah.
Maybe something
Yeah.
it means.
So
in my mind.
that's exactly what he talks about in the book. One of his rants, which I chose to leave out because it's just so much, was he goes into a rant about that when we are working inefficiently, we often shorten, and it actually just crunches us up. Technical term, crunches us up. That's what they do. And he talks about paying attention to that sense of length. So what you've said is really, really, and he thinks it's important to people. So you can add that into the soup as well, this idea of length. Yeah, but to get this idea of the leg or the arm. And in fact, what that does is if sorry, to do on the shoulders a bit more. If we looked at Sue and we did this as an FI kind of thing, she gave me the weight of her arm, often you'll see us doing it is kind of shortening, like compressing in, and then giving her that sense of length, and then lifting up. So she gets this sense of space. Now, what does the sense of length do? If she's contracted, like all short in here, like she's all short and short, and when she lifts, this is already short all through in here. Does that make sense? So she's all, all of this is contracted through her ribs and her clavicle in front of her shoulder. So she hasn't got any more to go in this section. So of course, all she's got left is in the shoulder joint. She's already stuck everywhere else. If we give her the sense of length, which means actually that her proximal has space, and then she lifts, then this can go to fold. If you just do it yourself, Sue, get a sense of length and then lifting. Now lift. Then she's got somewhere to organise. Now this is different for her. So she's got she's a smart cookie, so she's done. Okay, yep. People, does that make sense in your? So there's little wonder why I spend a lot of time fossicking around and getting space, people feeling the space between their ribs, having freedom in their clavicle and their freedom in their tummy a lot, which is part of our problem with, people being already very contracted and having a six-pack. Because if you're already short in there, you've got no choice to lift your leg up, or you've got left with your hip flexors to you because this is already short. Whereas if you can lie down and your belly can be long already, then when you lift, you've got the proximal can move. The proximal's got something to do. It's only tiny, but it's still there. Oh yeah. So there's a reason why we've all got bellies, because we can crank it up. There you go. Yeah. There are bellies and there are bellies. Okay. Yes. Sir.
It's on. Hello, testing.
Yep.
If you your foot is like in that direction and
Turned
sort of
out.
rotated,
Yep.
and you're lengthening and you're trying to explore what's easier. And is it easier to do that and straighten?
Yep.
Because it's hard to do it from that direction.
Yeah. So
Is that
again,
what he means by lengthening, or is that a
in
different
part,
thing?
what you've actually brought up is something else that I didn't put into this lesson that is in the book. Is he gets you to feel the difference between both of you. No, lie on your back. Usually, he's lying around like you belong to yourself. You're my store dummy. This is what you're told. So now have your toes pointing up towards the ceiling, and lift your left leg in the air. What he does in the book as a variation, as a prescribed variation, Alison, as opposed to a self-liberating, is now roll your leg out and lift up with your leg turned out. Now what happens, this is not so familiar to you, but something very different happens in the trunk. Right, so one really invites the hip flexor work more, and one takes the hip flexor out of it, so you've got to start using something else. That's a bit confusing to you. As you can see, she's sorting. So she's in an exploratory kind of, you can see your thinking down in your foot, in your legs, you can hear it. So you might want to go back to your mats and try the difference. So one is, taking the hip flexors actually out of the system. Kevin, what do you feel in the small of your back comparing those two? Yeah. He's suggesting that with your foot turned out, it's easier to lengthen your question. That's what he's suggesting. Yeah. 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 So he talks about, in the way I interpret it in the book, he sort of talks about having the leg turned out as it's going to make it easier. But what it's actually meaning is you have to start using proximal. It's not going to feel necessarily easier. It will, in order to make it easier, you will have to start accessing the further up the chain. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So this is getting quite biomechanical. We've lost half the room. What else do I need to say about the... Oh, now the other thing that I didn't mention, fundamental property of movement. If I work a flexor muscle, as it's working, the extensor muscle, so the antagonist, is getting a message to shut up. So if I do a lot of flexion, my extensors are getting the message So they'll lengthen, right? Then we flip over and we make the extensors work, and the flexors get a message to quiet. So we're mucking around with this, going from working to being quiet, working to being quiet. And it's going through that range in these two different physiological ways. So that's the beauty, that's the magic in this lesson. That's what's changing the nervous system in a way. Okay? And therefore, I don't need to know whether you are, predominantly more flex or predominantly more extensor, because your system will take this diet and you will calibrate yourself. That's the beauty of it. Oh no, you have to use flexors. It's just a question of how many you can come up to. You cannot lift your arm and your leg out without using some of the flexors. At least some of them. Oh no, don't go there. They're all part of the same thing. Yeah, yeah. And you will start. Yeah. The nature of the lesson is, especially if you're getting your breathing kind of exploring that, I reckon it's not a question of faith, but I reckon you do need more faith in the system. And that to keep doing the repetitions, keep doing, that's why this is not, that repetition is important in this, that you will start using more and more proximal because these ones just get quite tired. So who didn't notice some change in that coming more proximal? Maybe you already were. No.
So if you use the line, is he using that as an imagery tool, or is he really using that?
I didn't use it.
I know you haven't used any lines, but I guess when I do it and when I think about lengthening, I do think about it.
Yeah.
Because that's what I'm doing basically. So yeah, I guess that's my thing. Like with his primary image with the lines, is that still meant to have such a focus on this biomechanical analysis of what we're doing?
That is a tool. The lines are a tool. They're not the tool. They're not in every lesson, and they're not particularly relevant in this lesson. Yeah. So getting back to yours then, some people didn't feel that change, but if you looked around, people did change. They just do. They just do. Is that enough for me to say? No. Yeah, that's okay. You're still using, you have to flex, so you're still using some flexors. You have to, otherwise the limbs don't lift and lift them.
Yeah, I do see that. Yeah, but and then you in the prone position using your extension. So I'm practicing and focusing on that movement, and I might have been using different processes.
What did you experience?
Well, I was able to do the
yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I'm actually
Yep. We're all a work in progress. Yeah. All right, cup of tea. How do I know that you want a cup of tea? The fact that almost nobody's left listening See something, tell me.
I,
Yes, 'cause
I
I've got
want
you
to
two
I want
pens
to
on the
ask
floor.
you something to everyone.
That's
We
right.
have not too much spoons, and if you want to find your spoon to your tea,